Hey guys, it's me, Brock. I told you guys that I was going to have a mental health professional in here to answer questions about the mental state of people during all this COVID stuff. So that's exactly what this episode's going to be. I'm really excited for it. She's a great person. I've talked to her, and she's really interested in doing this. So I feel you guys are going to benefit from it greatly. Plus, I've got questions from you guys that you wanted me to ask her. So without further ado, here is Kristen McAdams. What's up, everybody? Okay. I know I'm starting this little weird laughing, but you're going to have to understand here in a second why I'm laughing. I forgot to hit record until I had already said hello to Kristen and kind of asked her what her credentials were. So you're going to hear a really awkward start to this podcast. But hey, what for nothing would this show be without an awkward start? And so Kristen, where did you get your start?
Actually kind of a complicated background when it comes to psychology. Right now, my license is what's called a licensed professional counselor associate. That just is a fancy name for you have to get 3,000 hours before you're fully licensed. That being said, my road to this licensure has been very, very long. I've studied psychology for 15 years at various universities across the country. I've studied at the doctorate level. I've published research. I was a certified addictions professional in the state of Florida, and I worked in addictions there for several years. So I have sort of a unique path to this particular credential.
Yes, and to me that basically means you're very, very qualified to talk about all this stuff, which is the important thing.
I'd like to think so at this point in the game, yeah.
So let me ask you more of an opinion first. When all this COVID stuff started and they started locking down, what was your initial thought in terms of how people were going to deal with it?
I really wasn't sure. I just knew that people were going to need some leadership.
Yeah.
And I highly underestimated the amount of leadership that sprung up or did not spring up.
Yeah.
And I did notice that, everybody went into it differently, despite the general consensus message being that we were all in it together, because we were not. And I think that felt very disjointed because people all went into it at different places in their lives. So when I first was asked questions about it and people were like, oh, well, how about you give us some idea about what's anxiety look like? What's depression look like? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to give you a list of symptoms because you may be experiencing all of these symptoms in the context of this alone.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's important because also if you would have gave them a list of things to look out for, they would have specifically looked out for those things. And the second one of them got triggered, like, oh, I'm depressed. That's it. This is ruining everything for me.
Yep. I'm going to throw in the towel. I have depression now. I'm screwed. 2020 doomsday, just that mentality. And I don't think that's helpful in a time like this. I tend to be good in crisis, but that's me. That's what I do, for a living. So my first reaction was like, all right, how do we help? How do we get resources to people? How do we have people access services as mental health professionals? And like I said, there was so many different forms of leadership that popped up. It was sort of really hard to disseminate that information. So it was sort of like finding the right outlet and the right connections to people, because through disconnection, we really can find connection.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was really important to sort of like evaluate and take inventory, like, where are we at? What do we have? What do we have access to? What do we have resources for?
Do you think that it is criminally I don't know if underfunded, or we were criminally unprepared for the mental ramifications of this?
Oh yeah. I think that we were all going into it sort of unhealthy and unstable to begin with.
Yeah.
Right. I think that, the mental health crisis has been escalating for years in this country. And I think we like to attribute it to a lot of different things that aren't necessarily the culprits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, when you're compounded with an actual crisis, that your qualities of distress tolerance and your personal characteristics really come out and shine, and or not.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the thing is, part of the disconnection, do you believe, is, and I don't want to sound like one of these people that are blaming technology for anything, because obviously us being able to do this is technologically incredible.
Absolutely.
But the fact that we've become so depersonalized through technology that now that we have to kind of interact with people, you know, maybe it's just even the people you're locked in your house with at this point, that it makes it 100 times harder, because you had some, especially the younger generation, had no foundation in person-to-person interaction.
Right. And I kind of look at technology as like for a great amount of it, it was something that they did intentionally, right? So for like years and years now, 12 years, they've had research out, and they've had business economics magazines and marketing and things like that out talking about how they use social media marketing to indoctrinate beliefs or change value systems, or really just, get into the lives. It was known as one of the largest psychological data mines in history.
Yeah.
And we're just over here freely putting all our information in the internet. Like, this is fun. I like mashed potatoes. Like, let's tell the world, and it's, we very innocently stumbled into that because we couldn't have known what we didn't know, which was that it would lead to this next generation of kids that are addicted to technology. And I hate to use the word addicted, but it really is that, like, your brain, the way that the social media and things like that are set up is so that your brain gets these bursts of dopamine. And that's why it's a scroll and a feed, and not something that has like a definitive beginning and end. It's sort of just this continuous nonstop Russian roulette game.
Well, I think that, I mean, even beyond just the COVID thing, I think the social media aspect, especially for kids, is not a good thing. Like, I said it in my last episode that if I was a kid now, I don't know if I would have made it, because when you got bullied when we were kids, it ended as soon as you got off the bus. That was it. And now it follows you home. It's in your pocket. It's in your inbox.
On your nightstand. Yeah.
It's everywhere. And I think that is, I mean, from what I know, and it's not, obviously not as much as you in this field, but suicides with young teen girls have really escalated it, and young teen males aren't as dramatic of an escalation, because I guess it's the difference in how men and women think, or boys and girls think. They put guys, I guess we don't put as much stock in the social world as, little girls do. And now you've got 12-year-olds that are committing suicide, unfortunately, due to the hyper social media world we live in.
Well, boys tend to externalize and girls tend to internalize. So I can't even, you can imagine being young in this day and age where you're expected to be some sort of star influencer, or be the expert, or be, this perfectly filtered human. And now you're getting all of this downloaded onto you, and heightening that. Yeah. So there's even more to internalize now, and there's really nothing to do with it. Like, the kids can't go out and fight it out on the playground, or learn how to scrape their knee, or learn how to have a constructive conversation. Because now, and sometimes even the parents, right, don't know what to do with that. Yeah. Now, if we don't know how to interact or engage with one another, like you said, we found each other, at home on the couch. Like, I saw all those memes that were like, oh, this person on the couch, he's very nice. They say he's my husband, I want to get to know him, and we were all sort of stuck with our own feelings.
Yeah.
And all these things, we didn't have as much distraction anymore. So now, as adults, we're sitting here looking around like, all right, we don't know what to do. Our resources are challenged. Our emotional capacity was already challenged going into this. And now we have our kids sitting here who are already getting downloaded with all these social messages and expectations. And now they have nothing to do but sit and be plugged in to the technology.
Yeah. And I feel that, like, people get used and adapt and overcome, but I don't think this is something so easily overcome. Like, we're hardwiring these kids to not be social, to stay inside, to say, okay, when you go out, you can hang out with your friends, but everybody's seen this. 5 kids in a room, all on their phones, texting each other,
not
talking, but they're having the same conversation they would have had, but they can't do it face to face.
Right. They can't read facial cues. They can't, there's a fear there, right? There's a fear of looking at somebody in the face and just having a conversation and showing up as you are when you can't be this avatar that you present, because it's really what you do with social media or what you do online, right? You get to be whoever you want to be, which is part of the appeal of like video games and things like that too, right? Like you get to create a world that you can exist in where you get to be the villain or the hero or whoever you want to be.
Yeah. And I think there's no distinction now because, like you said, they create an ID online and they live their life and only let you see the good parts. And I think us adults are 100% guilty as that as well.
Right.
I used to make a joke all the time that the days are gone when, if I had kids right now, they'd be like, how'd you meet mom? It's not like, oh, we met at a bar or we met, high school. No. It's like I was swiping through Tinder and,
Match.com, yeah.
And I found your mom, and that's a norm. Everybody loves that word, the new norm now. And that's been the new norm for a long time, things like that. I hate it too. Trust me.
So much. It's the worst term ever.
But because I think it validates.
If you weren't having a new normal already every day, like you should be evolving personally anyway. So you should always be sort of developing a new normal of some sort. So then when they were like, oh, new normal, I was like, oh, this is neurolinguistic programming.
That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. It's 100%. And I think a lot of people think they're not susceptible to that type of thing. But there's a reason why NLP exists. It works. I
actually went on a rant this morning on my social media because I was listening to a commercial and the commercial was talking about, I think it was like a Geico commercial, and they were talking about somebody being bad at their job and like joking about it. And I was thinking about like how many people are struggling right now to show up at work and like do a good job.
Yeah.
And now you have this commercial that's like, oh, ha, 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 people are bad at their jobs. And now everybody's out trying to like interact in a COVID era. And and they're already just like absorbing that message from the radio. And people forget that marketing is intended to change your mind. It's intended to do something with your thought process and your emotions and your choices.
Yeah. I don't need a car, but now I might need a new car. Like I'm not 100% sure,
Right.
And I think even as adults, people's social cues are way off now. Like you've got the people that are hyper afraid of everything that's going on, and that's not who they normally are. And now me trying to interact with somebody like that, the dynamic is so weird now.
Yeah, when you're in a fear state, your intention isn't to connect to something.
Yeah, it's the amygdala hijack. Your brain's telling you something's wrong here, even though this is a perfectly normal conversation. Like you could see they're antsy, they're tense. They're just trying to get out of there. And I think that's what a lot of people right now are living in, and that fear of, whereas before they were probably at a 3 in terms of anxiety, but now everybody's at a 6, like just like this string that just keeps getting tighter and tighter and tighter until it pops.
Or if you were at a 6, now you're the person screaming in traffic,
Exactly.
It's going viral.
Because some people were at a 6 before all this started.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this was just the thing that's going to boil people like that over. And I think it's a shame because there's nowhere they can really reach out for help. Like, what's your opinion on the telehealth like this?
So it's interesting because this is a topic that has come up a lot for me recently, especially in the last week, where I'll see people put up these messages like, oh, like tried to find a therapist, but it's a $350 copay and insurance doesn't cover it and blah, blah, blah. And it's really unfortunate because I know I live in Austin, and Austin, Texas is I think the 3rd most saturated market for mental health therapists, meaning that we have a really dense population of mental health therapists. So there's a lot of help available. I think there's a huge barrier between finding the correct services, because what happens is that there's lots of different types of therapy.
Yeah.
And therapists in saturated markets are encouraged to specialize and to niche down. And when they do that, you'll have like I don't work with transgender, for example.
Yeah.
I don't work with co-parenting.
Yeah.
I don't work with a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things that I don't work with. I'm known as working in addiction, so I get addiction referrals. I'm known as working with confidence and coping skills, so I get a lot of those referrals. But what happens is that people don't know where to look, right? So they call their insurance company.
Hmm.
Most therapists don't take insurance because it's such a pain in the ass to get on a panel.
Yeah.
And the insurance is only going to cover, maybe 6 to 8 sessions.
Yeah.
And then most of the therapists around here are licensed the way that I am. So they're an associate. So I can't even take insurance if I wanted to.
Wow.
And I can provide a super bill, which means, I can give you a month to month list of the sessions that you have attended, and you can submit that to your insurance company, and then they can potentially reimburse you, but that depends on the insurance company.
Wow. That's,
So,
that's crazy because, physical health is important, as I've come to definitely learn, but
yeah.
the mental health aspect of all of this is almost more important now. I think at this point, I would say, psychologists, therapists are more important now than they've almost ever been. And
Yeah.
like, what's that company that got in trouble a couple of months ago? BetterHelp, because they didn't really have anybody licensed, but they changed it to where now there's people licensed to
Oh, I didn't
do.
even hear about that. I'll have people come in that say that they've tried BetterHelp and that it works to a degree,
Yeah.
but it's not actual therapy. And there's so many different things, like there's so many different licenses, right? You can go to a psychiatrist, a psychologist, you can go to a counselor, you can go to a marriage and family counselor, you can go to a child specialist or a family specialist or a couple specialist. There's
Yeah.
so many different things that you can do. And then there's so many different modalities that therapists can work with. So then to have something like BetterHelp, you're like, okay, well, that's fine for the interim, but like, what is it really? Is it crisis management? Because there are crisis management lines that you can call for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's lots of them now, lots of crisis management lines now.
And that's people are specialized in the crisis management at that, there, whereas BetterHelp is more just a generic, like, I just need somebody to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
if somebody really needed it, would that just be a viable option just until they found something like a therapist that would really be able to work with them and do whatever they need done?
Yeah, I think I think people will allow whatever they're ready to accept.
Yeah.
So if you're not quite ready to dive into going to full-term therapy, BetterHelp might be a good option to sort of like dip your toes in.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a company to develop something around therapy where if you're thinking about going to therapy, like there are some courses that you can take to work on self-improvement or to have an interim between being in therapy and then transitioning out of therapy. Because essentially, like as a therapist, we're moving through this era of where it used to be this long term, like you see your therapist for like 20 years, once a week for an hour a week.
Yeah.
And I think that the mental health field is really changing, and COVID has definitely lit a fire under that because now we want our clients to get better.
Yes.
There was an investment in people staying unhealthy because it meant more income and long-term job security and things like that. But I think that this generation of therapists like really just doesn't want that. We don't want long-term clients. We want you to come in, we want you to resolve what's happening for you, gain the skills, heal, and then move on.
Well, yeah, and I think that the long term, even like you said, they were more interested in financial gain at that point. I think even if you're getting people in, you're helping them, getting them out. Whenever somebody needs help that they know, they would suggest them to you.
Right.
And so it's almost like a break even point at that. You know what I mean? I believe that the key to all of this, just staying healthy, like keep your body moving, keep your mind moving. I don't know how recommended it is just to be able to go there, go somewhere, pick up a book, just read it, just to keep your mind busy, to keep your mind occupied and going, like it would be if you were at work or if you were at school as a kid.
Well, it's interesting because it's people like I think we've overcomplicated mental health a lot.
Hmm.
And I think that we've done that through like like advertising, medications to people. Like I can't stand like the bipolar medication commercials. And they're like,
Mhm.
do you sometimes dig at night? Like you're like, what? I don't know. I don't garden at midnight. Like, and then one person did that one time because they had insomnia and they're like, I might be bipolar. And then they go and they talk to their doctor about bipolar medications. Their doctor's burnt out. They're like, yeah, here, try it. Here's a mood stabilizer. And now everybody's like drugged up for no reason. Like it's this huge thing that's happened, I think. But I always tell people that problems are complicated and solutions are simple.
Yeah.
And out of all the different modalities and skills and things that I've learned in the 15 years of studying this, it's that your mind and your body have a bidirectional relationship. And we don't know everything about the brain. There's way too much to know about the brain. There's a
Of
lot that we
course.
don't know, but there's a lot that we do know. And we overcomplicate things all the time in terms of like what is really beneficial and useful and to achieve mental health and to achieve physical health, right? Because in physical health, it's the same idea, right? Like it's consistency.
Yep. You got to just keep plugging away at it. And as things, kind of like how exercising your body gets you in better health and gets you in better situations, would keeping your mind busy with, like I said, reading or something like that, does that benefit a mental health issue? Like with you keeping your mind busy and basically working your brain out, does that benefit at all?
Yes and no. It's definitely works along the premise of if you don't use it, you'll lose it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you have to. The more you read, the better at reading you'll be. The more you meditate, the more focused you'll be. But if you're using your thoughts as sort of like a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or if you're doing it to overthink or you're living in your head, like that can cause more anxiety.
Yeah.
So, and that can also be related to your nervous system. So if you have your volume up on your fight or flight and your thoughts going, you're not going to be able to think your way out of a heightened nervous system state.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes perfect sense, honestly. I think that people ask all the time, and I see it all the time on Facebook now or Twitter or whatever. They're asking for a psychiatrist. And I always suggest that they go talk to a psychologist first, because the psychiatrist's first inclination is to medicate you.
That's their job.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they do.
Yeah. That's their thing. Like, and I think if you just go straight into a medication situation, that is, like you're saying, it's masking it. It's not
Yeah.
dealing with it.
Yeah. Anytime you're putting something in your body that's going to alter the physiological state of something that's already supposed to be occurring in your body, it's going to throw off the rest of your body to some degree, right?
Yeah.
If you're taking testosterone and your body is not going to keep producing testosterone the same way because it's getting it supplemented from someplace else, so it's going to alter it in some way. It's the same with psych meds or mental health medications. And to a degree, there are some medications in the psychology world that are very effective and efficient and are necessary.
Yeah.
Mood stabilizers are one of those things if you have true bipolar disorder. But in terms of like antidepressants or Xanax, I think Xanax is like one of the worst drugs ever invented because all it's doing is numbing out your nervous system symptoms is the
Mhm.
physiological effect. And it's not doing anything with what's actually causing you anxiety. It's just changing the way it feels, which I don't like this whole, we're going to try to put ourselves in a happy, comfortable space all the time because that's not what life is. It's unrealistic. So, and with antidepressants, it's the same way, right? Like if you have somebody that goes into addiction and they're detoxing off of some sort of substance and they need like something to boost their neurochemicals a little bit just so that they have a baseline to work with to get
Mhm.
through some of the social, mental, emotional things that they're dealing with. That's cool. But I think that long term antidepressant medication use is ultimately not that beneficial. And I don't find people, I find people plateau
Yeah.
with it.
Like
And
there's
they
a
don't
point where
actually.
they're just not going to get any better from the medication, because then they still have to do the work with whatever the initial issue was that got to them.
Right. Right. Because there's so many components that are composed of our mental health. It is mental, emotional, social, contextual. There's a lot that's involved with it. And if you're only addressing one of those then and not touching the rest, then you're not
Yeah.
going to get very far.
I mean, you're seeing a lot of people now who had, let's say, been going to work for 4 or 5 years at a certain job now. They had their whole life set. This is the career I wanted, and then it's just all been taken away from them.
Right.
That alone, for the number of people that have experienced that makes it a mental health crisis, unquestionably.
Well, and so much of it has to do with the meaning we make in things. Like I always come back to making meaning, right? Because when you're talking about a situation like that and somebody lost a job like that they worked really hard to achieve and that they, had set their sights on and had a future plan with, that's grief,
Yeah.
right? That's a whole nother ball game. Grief is a completely different ball game. And loss is different because you're losing what you had planned for the future and you're doing it in a time that's already uncertain. So you might get into a space where you feel like, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
And why am I even doing this? Why would I try? And you feel defeated. And that's where sort of like learned helplessness comes in, where I tried and I failed and I tried and I failed and I might as well give up.
Yeah.
But the meaning that you make can really come from seeing what the disconnection can connect you to and learning how to pivot and lean into these things, because if the world isn't, it's not a certain place.
No.
It never has been. It never wasn't to begin with.
No. And I think that plays into people's, I think there was a lot of insecurity before the first lockdowns were kind of announced. And I think people were like, the uncertainty breeds dangerous behavior in my mind.
Yeah.
Uncertainty makes people volatile. It makes people aggressive. And now they've been locked in. Some of these people have been locked in their house with their family since February, and it's
fear-based.
Yeah. And it just gets more and more dangerous as the time goes on. I feel, I could be way off base with that, but I feel that the danger to the overall, let's just say here, the overall country is going to keep going up because people are focusing on the negativity of their situation and kind of not how to get through it right now.
Well, it has to, when you talk about making meaning and you think about that aspect and you think about, again, like even the commercial on the radio this morning and all the messages we're receiving, they're these huge, ominous, demanding messages, and they're on social media and they're on the TV and they're on the radio station. And it is very much this message of the end of the world and doomsday. And I think it's intended to keep people scared. And I think that that's part of the problem with what's happening, is that there is nobody out there that's trying to really instill hope in a constructive, useful way and give tools in terms of how to access resources, or how to think differently about it, or how to use your skills to do something different with your time and energy.
I think that people are trying at this point to learn how to think again, because, the one word I really hate is offensive.
Yes.
And, there's a saying that, like, it just stuck with me every time I've heard of it from Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
To think you have to be willing to be offensive and be offended, because somebody's fundamentally saying something that you disagree with at this point, and I don't think the kids more specifically now, know how to be offended because they've never been offended at this point. And I think
I like I think I've said this before, Dan Crenshaw's quote, there's a difference between something that is offensive and being offended.
Yes. And I just think it's a very, I'm not scared for like my personal situation or my safety or anything like that. I am scared for the average person who doesn't have the tools to deal with this. What do you think is the most detrimental thing that could be going on with the average person that just didn't have the tools to get through all this for this long? Like, originally it was only supposed to be 2 weeks, and now we're into December.
Well, the biggest thing is resources, right? Like, it's sort of like we're wiping out the small business.
Yeah.
Right. Like, we're wiping out people's livelihoods. You either you either worked for a corporation or you worked for a small business, right? Like
Yeah.
there's where else would you be working for?
Yeah.
And when the small businesses get wiped out, it not only wipes out the owner of that business and everything that they worked for, but everybody that relied on them to provide a paycheck. So when we have these lockdowns and we have this fear and this scarcity, and we're not exchanging money, and I don't mean to bring it to money, but I very
Yeah.
much look at money as an energy.
Yeah.
And when we lose the ability to exchange that money and that currency and that energy with one another, we all fail,
Yeah.
right? Like nobody can engage in self-improvement and well-being if I don't have the resources to purchase something from you, or I don't have the resources to get what I need to meet my needs. So I think that that's probably the biggest issue, is that people are losing their livelihoods.
And I think this time of the year too, it's especially hard because this time of year people kind of get depressed, abnormally high levels compared to the rest of the year. And you compound that with everything that's come before this year, and it's almost like a recipe for disaster that nobody has control over, is what they feel like.
Yeah, everybody seems a little dissociated by this time of the year, but you have to remember too, there's only so many days left in this year.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, yeah, sure, when 2021 hits and the ball drops, or whatever, if we even have a ball drop, whenever that clock changes
Yeah.
to 2021, no, you're not going to magically turn back into a pumpkin, right? You're still going to be living in whatever new normal you're in right now. But I always look at it as a time to pause and reflect and regroup and take inventory. And I think that part of the problem with the holidays and things like that is linked to this idea of perfectionism. Like perfectionism is when you have this imagination of this expectation,
Mm-hmm.
and no matter what you're doing in the moment, you can never reach that thing that you imagined, right? So you highly overestimate what it's supposed to look like, and you underestimate what you can do to make it look different.
Yeah.
And I find that people do that with the holidays, where they're like, oh, it's supposed to look this way and I need it to be this. And really what the holidays are about, I think, for anybody, which I think is what is special about the holidays, is the slowing down and the taking a step back and the reflecting and the gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of allowing yourself to take inventory and shift into what you need next. And that can be really hard for people to do when they're in a place of fear, right? If you're in a fight or flight state, your nervous system is jacked up, it's going to be really hard for you to take a step back and just take your hands off the wheel and see what happens.
Well, and I think this time of year, normally you're kind of forced to take that step back because, here in America, we have Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And then immediately after that, we kind of do the same holiday with Christmas. We just replace what food you eat. That's really the only difference. So if the first, it's almost like a levee. If the first holiday doesn't get you to slow down, the second one will.
Right. Like we need that much time as Americans to slow down. It's such a fast paced country. And I think that goes back to exactly like what you were saying earlier, is that we all just woke up in 2020 and didn't know what to do. Like the alarm clock went off and we didn't have to go to work. We didn't have to run the same errands, and everyone was sort of like, I don't know how to slow down.
Yeah. And I think that on the opposite coin of that, some people have taken 2020 and just run with it and have made it their best year. I've said numerous times on this podcast, on a bunch of podcasts, that 2020 has essentially been my best year of life. It's taken away all the distractions, all the, hey, let's go to the movies, let's go do this, let's go do that. And it's allowed me to just focus. There's no excuses.
Yeah. Yep. I had the same experience myself, and it's not, people are like, oh, well, you're a mental health therapist, like it should be a great year for you. And I'm like, well, no, because nobody can pay for therapy. It's not a great year because I'm a therapist. It's a great year because I got to take care of myself. And when you get to take care of yourself, your life improves. And when your life improves, it improves the lives of the people around you that you encounter and connect with.
That is something I've learned big time, is that whenever I first started taking care of myself, I thought it was just going to take care of me and I was going to be okay. I've said this to you before that, in order to take care of yourself, you got to be a little bit selfish.
Yes.
But within that selfishness, everybody around me, I feel, has come up a couple levels with me. the people that I associate with the most, you know?
Yeah. Cause we need that. We need that energy to vibe with. Like people need to inspire and motivate each other. And that takes a bit of humility. It takes some not knowing and being okay with not knowing and being okay with being uncomfortable to really allow what to be lifted by another person or to lift another person.
Yeah. My whole thing is to, like, I spend a lot of the day trying to figure out ways to make me uncomfortable, because when I'm uncomfortable, that's when I feel that I need to push more.
Yeah. You're in a state of growth.
Yeah. If I'm constantly satisfied, what is there to strive to? Like, I'm always trying to figure out a challenge, whether it's like the other day, they posted online that they're having this race called the Goggins 4-4-48, which is every 4 hours you run 4 miles for 48 hours.
Wow.
And that's insane. Like, everything about that is insane. But me wanting to be challenged, I've thought about doing this, like, on a weekend, just being like, all right, this weekend's going to suck, but let's just get through it. Because I think with a physical accomplishment like that, your mental state is elevated.
Yeah, well, it's like even if you think about muscles alone, right? Like you were talking about reading and using, mental muscles. Mm-hmm. If you're not moving, your muscles will atrophy. So if you're in a state where you're like, quote unquote, satisfied or content or happy or whatever people like to call it now, right? You're going to atrophy. And you're eventually going to wind up discontent and irritable, and you're going to find problems to solve, because that's what we do as humans. We need something to combat. I think that's why a lot of people did rise out of this year a little bit differently, because they needed something to combat, right? So COVID's a really good enemy to overcome.
And those people had gotten hardened when before, there's a lot of soft people, and I think a lot of people are learning that about themselves, and it's either beating them because they're like, oh, I'm too soft. I can't stand up to this dragon that's in front of me. And then some people basically stood in front of it with a baseball bat and said, let's go. Like, let's see where this goes. Let's get it done.
They were ready.
Yeah. And it's just this year. The thing that always has bothered me is when people are like, oh, 2020 again. It's like, no, the year had nothing to do with any of this.
No.
Do you remember a few years ago? I think it was like 2016 where
had to be.
I think there was like 50 major celebrities were dying. Like Prince died that year and all that. And everybody's like, 2016 strikes again. It's like, no.
It was like a huge death toll. I remember it was crazy. I actually got divorced that year.
See, 2016 was not your favorite year either.
It was tough, but it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. I'm like super grateful to the girl that my ex-husband's now married to. I'm like, I want to write her a thank you card.
Thank you for taking this off of my hands.
Thank you for my state of growth. I was actually thinking about that before I came on, and I was thinking about how much I used to love Austin, and I came to Austin because it was like this very comfortable place for me. And it was very, it's like geared to be comfortable, it's like nice music and pretty murals and everything's like, I love you. And this, that, and the other thing, like the mural, I love you so much. And, Willie Nelson. And I realized very quickly after something hard happened, like the divorce, that I was like, oh, this is the thing that's going to cause me to grow. Like staying comfortable with my pretty murals and my nice music is not going to be the thing that really gives me my growth engine, challenges me to be a better person. And that is so important. And I think to bring it back to the kids, right? Like that's what's missing for them.
Yeah.
We're seeing this generation of kids come up that came up in the participation trophy era. And I hear it all the time that these kids have now grown up and they're in their, mid 20s, maybe late 20s, and they don't know what it's like to fail, and they don't know what it's like to compete, and they can't tolerate the distress of not being good enough. Yeah. And they don't realize that it's okay to not be good enough.
Yeah. I that to me is a huge one. You can see even now kids that have never heard no. Right. Working at a major university, I talk to these kids very often. Right. Like they don't know basic life skills.
I used to be one of those kids at your major university.
Exactly. Except for I wasn't there at that time. And it's mind-numbing that, oh God, what is that old phrase? Hard people create easy times create soft people create hard times create hard people. And it's just a cycle.
Right.
It's just a cycle. And if
you haven't seen that this year.
Yeah. And if that cycle is true, people that are going to be like my kids, those are going to be some hard children. Like,
like it skips a generation, right? Like,
there's going to be
everything pendulates, everything swings from one extreme to another over time. And it always will, because humans are only happy when they're in a state of growth. And if they're not growing through something, they're going to find something to combat.
Yeah, exactly. And, obviously the extreme forms of that are guys that, join the military, get to be Navy SEALs and crazy shit like that. And they just need challenges every step of their way.
Yep.
But there's also people who create challenges when there's no reason for a challenge to be there. Like,
right.
That just,
you really have to know what your dragons are, what to be afraid of. I was actually talking to somebody about that this morning. She was like, I've really been having a lot of anxiety. And she was like, I realized that my anxiety is related to fear. And I was like, well, anxiety is fear.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's your nervous system being on.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people try to make their nervous system stop. And that's
impossible.
Not necessary. Yeah, it's not necessary, right? Like your nervous system's supposed to come on. Like you're supposed to be disgusted by a food that's going to make you sick, and you're supposed to be scared of something that's going to kill you.
Yeah.
But now we're scared of like judgment or losing or the imaginary things that we make up in our heads, and we've lost our ability to really test reality. And that does go back to technology and the internet and where we get our information from and knowing what's real and who to trust and all of that.
Do you think that there's going to be a situation post COVID where the parents are like, all right, I think these kids are a little bit too heavy on the technology, and then they try to draw them back, but they've already basically been giving them this drug the whole time. Like before COVID, they leaned on it during COVID, realized there's a problem, and now post they're going to have to try to draw them back. Like, what can a parent do at that point to be like, all right, we're going to slow your internet down for a little bit?
Right. Now, there's a couple things that come to mind with that question. And one is like, that's why it's so frustrating that schools went virtual. And it frustrated me even more because I was like, you are the education system, which I think is part of a lot of problems, but you needed to come up with a plan. Like you're in control. You say what goes. You could have sat down and been like, hey, this is the plan. We're going to go virtual from this time to this time. And after that, we'll reevaluate and see if we can go back in person. Yeah. But that's not what happened. They caused a lot of unnecessary stress because of political agendas and whatever else. And they just gave people even more uncertainty and more reasons to fight and combat each other rather than just saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need to do. This is what we have to work with. This is how we're going to do it. Any leader would do that, right? And that's not what happened. So now all the kids were very confused because they have some people are hybrid, some people are in person, some people, back and forth, and their environment's changing.
There's
and
no consistency.
Structure. Yeah, kids need structure.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, most of us do. We need some kind of structure. We have, the sun rises and the sun sets, and we have seasons, and everything's organized into a calendar and hours of the day and whatever. So kids need structure. And parents now are obviously, like you said, loss of job, loss of career, loss of these things, and they're going through their own stuff, and they're emotionally, their nervous system's dysregulated, and now they have to deal with their kid who's emotionally, their nervous system's dysregulated, and it's just like chaos, and it just compounds and builds and compounds and builds. But what you do in a time of uncertainty to manage that is to create certainty for yourself and create decisions and act and create decisions. So when you're making those decisions, you may not know what the consequences of those decisions are, which brings me to my second point about that question, which is we are already in a phase of evolution that has already begun taking a hold and is moving forward. Yeah. So I think on my podcast, my doctor came on and we were talking about the evolution of like a man and a woman's brain.
Yeah.
And how there's tons and tons and tons of history over time that shows why men and women's brains developed this way. And now what's happening with like gender roles and transgender and things like that, and kids being able to choose their gender, like before they're emotionally capable of it, it's creating an evolution, right? So anything that you only know what you're told, and anything that you're absorbing from the environment and the message is going to affect whatever synaptic pruning is happening for those kids.
Yeah.
So that evolution, and also screen time, screen use, right? It's not, you're overstimulated and you're only using two of your senses, maybe sight and hearing.
Yeah.
And you're not engaging all the rest of your senses, smell, taste, touch. So that's creating an evolution. So all of these things that we like created with the best intentions, technology, computers, gender fluidity, like all these things are essentially just also molding the youth to evolve into something else. So I honestly, to answer your question more simply, I couldn't tell you what's going to happen next because we've never been there.
And, you know, I know there's some people that are going to hear that and go, oh my God, it's the end of times, you know? But I think in uncharted territory, there's always the opportunity for something great to happen.
It's like when cavemen found fire.
Yes, exactly. They kept, you know, whether it was rubbing the sticks together or, you know, smashing the rocks together, it was an uncertain thing, but led to the development of everything we have today.
There's always some sort of unanticipated consequence, whether it be good or bad, and everything's going to come, like you're going to get both.
Yeah. Well, like when I was a kid, I felt like I had a lot of screen time, quote unquote. Granted, our screen time was completely different from the kids today. But when I look back on it, like I was maybe playing like 3 hours a week on video games or computer or whatnot.
Oregon Trail.
Yeah, Oregon Trail. Yeah, there's only so many times you could die of dysentery before you're just like, fuck this game.
Playing Snake on my Nokia. Changing the face cover of it.
Exactly. And that's as into it as we got. It makes you think of that quote from Jurassic Park. You did something thinking if you could do it, you never stopped to think if you should do it.
Right.
And and I think that's a big issue, and it's technically coming to bite people in the ass. Like, as much as family time is awesome, spending time with your family is great, there has never been a generation that has spent more time with their family than right now.
Right. That's true. Like, yeah. And now they're probably, I imagine, I'm not a parent, but I imagine if I was a parent and I had, you know, say myself and my husband, and, you know, we're both in a 2-career household and our kids are growing up on a screen, and I come home and all of a sudden I realize, you know, little Johnny looks like a sociopath and I can't figure out why. And it's because he doesn't have any social skills. And I didn't realize that because I thought I was checking all the boxes and doing the right things.
Yeah.
Doing paying attention to my own life.
Well, I mean, if you, oh God, like it's just mind numbing to me overall that it has gotten to this point, honestly. You see kids that had no exposure to going outside, getting dirty, and as somebody who plays now a decent amount of games and stuff like that, but I've got the thing in my brain that says, all right, that's enough. Let's go be a social human being, you know, let's go outside. And now I feel that the kids just don't have that ability. They don't, like, if I was to take, you know, just some random kid and just be like, hey, let's go hang out here. You'd be like, oh, I don't know about that. There's a lot of people there, and that's unhealthy. That's very unhealthy. You know, a 14-year-old supposed to be playing with friends outside and stuff like, and, you know, I know that sounds really old school, but that's what it is. It's
where you learn rejection. It's where you learn failure. It's where you learn discipline. It's like all of those things. You know, I grew up riding horses, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're so fortunate to be an equestrian." And I'm like, "Yeah, that I was very fortunate to do that." But it taught me competition. It taught me how to get my hands dirty. It taught me how to play as a team member.
Yeah.
It taught me how that I had to get all of my work and schoolwork done before we went to compete, because if I didn't, I'd fall behind. You know, and it taught me how to train to compete and how to earn something and work for something.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, take, for example, when I was a kid, I always have an issue where when I get focused on something, nothing else in the world matters but that thing. When I was in high school and middle school, I got focused in on music so hard. School didn't matter. School was a thing I did between playing. Yeah. But that grew my social abilities way beyond the average person, because I'm 15, 16, 17 at night going to these clubs in Fort Lauderdale, playing these shows, meeting people that are like 48, 50, you know, and being able to have a conversation with them.
I bet we probably crossed paths back in the day and didn't know it.
I don't doubt that at all. Especially with the circles that, you know, you ran in and the circles I ran in. A lot of people had run into me that now they're just like, oh man, I had somebody a month ago. It's like, yeah, you don't remember me? I'm like, no. They're like, I've been to your house. And I'm just like, you've been to my house? And they're like, yeah, it's at this place and this place. I'm like, oh my God, you've been to my house. Like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Had that experience. That happens pretty frequently in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, exactly. Not so much in Austin, Texas. In Austin, you know, you were saying that it was very laid back, and I've always thought that if Austin was a person, it's like their number one spokesperson now, which is McConaughey. Like that is the attitude.
I wish the rest of Austin was more like McConaughey.
Because he's been everywhere with with his, you know, his thing, like his McConaugheyisms. I don't know. Is that
that's its own thing now.
Yeah, it's just the relaxed atmosphere, and I see how when you're there, you could get really comfortable in that atmosphere. I was just like, everything's
it's
cool.
Very welcoming. It's inviting and welcoming if you're also welcoming and inviting. But if they don't, I shouldn't speak for an entire city in general, over 1 million people. But it's they don't like controversy so much. It seems like it's kind of tough sometimes because it's very political. It's a very political divide between the different counties. And if you go to different counties, you can see how the mentality changes from county to county.
Yeah.
It's very, very apparent, and it happens very abruptly on the county lines. And it's kind of interesting to witness, especially going through this year. It's just been very interesting.
Now, something that a lot of people have asked me whenever I said that you were coming on was, as a parent, how do you help your kids navigate? What do you create to help them get through this?
Well, I think that's the biggest word is create, right? This creativity, because you have to get creative, really, right? Yeah. You have to, it's like, for some reason, the elf on a shelf just popped into my mind. You know what I mean? Like parents will go all out for elf on a shelf and be like, and they like, post pictures of it on Instagram and stuff. But now they're having to do that like all day, every day with everything, and like with school and like their own lives. And I think we're more likely to be creative if we are relaxed.
Yeah.
So I think for parents, tending to your own mental health first, like putting your oxygen mask on first, is key, because your kids are going to pick up on your nervous system. Mm-hmm. And they're not realizing that they're absorbing and adapting and developing in relation to your nervous system. So, you know, every parent in the world wants the best for their kids and wants to protect their kids and wants to do the things that their parents didn't do for them, right? Like they want to like make up for all the wrongs that they had in their childhood. But as parents, you're inevitably going to fuck your kids up. Like that's just, we're humans, right? Like something's going to happen that your kid's going to hold against you someday, because kids individuate. Eventually they have to reject everything that they know to be true about themselves and about you so that they can go figure out who they are.
The funniest thing about what you just said is, you know, I've heard tons of comics that basically they're new parents and they do something. They're like, oh, well, that's just damage there that you're going to have to deal with through therapy. Yeah. Like, I know I screwed that up. That's my bad. We'll deal with that when it comes out later.
Yeah. Like they're just keeping score of all right, that's a therapy bill. That's a therapy bill. But no, when you think about being a parent, right, the best thing you can do is keep your kid fed, keep their body moving, and keep them sheltered and a roof over their head, and to not download your stuff onto them, right? Like you're allowed to have feelings in front of your kids, right? It's good for them to watch you solve problems. It's not good to recruit them as a source of stability, or to lean on them, or to treat them like a friend, right? They are seeking boundaries, they are seeking structure, and you are the authority and the expert in their lives. So essentially the professional, right? They look to you for those things. So really, again, attending to your mental health and your well-being, and doing some of the things that we've talked about by creating consistency and creating boundaries and creating certainty where there is none can be really good for them, because then they're going to learn how to do that. It's like teach a man to fish, right? Like
Yeah.
give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish. Like that's like the slogan of 2020, I think. Teach a man to fish, and your kids will be okay because they'll be able to fend for themselves someday.
You actually said a very good analogy, which was put your oxygen mask on first, which if you guys have been on a plane, that's the whole thing. Put your oxygen mask on, and then you can help everybody else. Kids are very perceptive. They don't know what they're picking up on. They don't know that the air is thick and tension and it's not coming from them. Mm-hmm. So that makes a lot of sense. If you're more calm about the situation, it'll inevitably spread to them. Like the feeling of everything's okay, we're good. They're going to get that feeling like, okay, everything's okay. Like we're good. We're going to make through this and everything. Do you think that getting outside, even if it's with your parent at that point, and just, whether it's exercise or just going outdoors, like, do you think that plays a big role in this?
Yeah, huge. I think being outside, it plays a huge role in it. I think fresh air is key. I think sunlight is key. Vitamin D is key in any scenario. You can think what you want about coronavirus, but at the end of the day, your physical health is paramount, and our physical health is relatively basic, right?
Yeah.
Fuel your body with good things, move it, get it outside. And I imagine, like, even when you're asking me that question, I imagine like parents, being stressed out and forgetting to play, forgetting to go outside and have a snowball fight, or forgetting to go outside and just, do yoga with your kid on the back deck, or just sit on the back deck and breathe some oxygen together and be still.
Yeah. And because I do feel there's also, the type of parents out there that are just so frantic. They're just throwing a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Whereas if they just slow down, just take a second.
Yeah, we overcomplicate everything.
Exactly. Sometimes, what is the expression they tell people in med school? Think horses, not zebras. If you hear the hoof beats, it's probably a horse, not a zebra coming down the street. Right. And I think a lot of parents need to do that. And, some of them probably want to do that. They just, everything being so frantic right now, whether it's the Christmas time, they're trying to get money to give their kid a good sense of normalcy. Because I can 100% attest to the fact that when I was with my family for Thanksgiving, felt great, felt normal. Like there's people, football's on TV, and you're just like, this is good. This is what normal feels like again. And, I've had a couple friends who've gone to movies since a couple of them are open around here. And they're like, man, it just felt good to not be home.
Yep. And we've had to like create our own normal. And if you had a drastic shift from what your normal was to now, like some people's lives didn't change. Like my partner works in pest control. Like his life has not changed at all.
Yeah. The bugs never stop coming.
Yeah. The bug people are still scared of snakes. Like everybody's still upset about that. So it's like, he was essential. But and that's why I say everybody's sort of in a different boat. Right. And I think that you really have to have patience with yourself and self-compassion as parents. Like give yourself permission to not know the answer. And give yourself permission to take some time to really sit and figure out what the answer is for you, because everybody's got something different going on. Some parents are single parents and co-parenting, or some people are single parents and not co-parenting, or not co-parenting well.
Yeah.
Some people are going through a divorce. Some people are reuniting with their family and like really enjoying it because they're seeing them for the first time. Some people are in domestic violence situations.
Stuck inside
Some
with
kids
people.
are going hungry. Like everybody's in a different boat. So I think that really taking inventory, like again, everyone's like, oh, we're going through this together. And we're really not.
No.
We're not going through this together. It's the same storm. We're all in different boats.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost the example of a macro and micro problem. The macros, everything shut down. We're all experiencing that together. But then the micro is my individual house is dealing with something that the apartment above me is dealing with something different, and there's just everybody's in their own reality right now.
Yeah, your life's going to look completely different if you're raising two kids by yourself in an apartment in New York, or if you're with a huge Christian family way out in East Texas.
Yeah.
Not
much is going to change for you.
No, like everything's going to be, completely different for those two people. And people forget that, I think, this year, which I think has been unfortunate because everybody expects each other to be on the same side or be of the same opinion.
Hmm.
And it's okay that we don't have it's okay that we have different opinions because we're not of the same experiences. And we can't expect everybody to be accountable for everybody else. It's just unrealistic. You have to be accountable to yourself.
Yeah, well, and another good thing is different opinions create different solutions. You know,
Right.
your solution for your household is going to be different from the solution from my household. You
Yes.
know, like I said, this year has given me time to read more. I'm just like, well, I can't go anywhere, so I'm just going to read and work out more, and that's what I've
Right.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. We did the same thing. We started podcasts in my house. Who didn't start a podcast?
Yeah,
And what's funny is that and it's like, who are you if you don't have a podcast? I love the podcasting community because it's made so many awesome connections and I've learned so much, not only about myself, but about other people and about how other people solve things and different professionalism and leadership styles and things like that. And I think people have asked if I think that it's been outlived. And I think it's just starting. I think this whole media industry is just starting up. And I think it's because we went from the quick breaking news headlines from all the major networks and everyone's like, fuck you, we
don't want to hear this anymore.
No, we want long form conversation and it may be a little bit more anecdotal in that sense, but at least you're hearing from other real world people with real world experiences from different professions and different backgrounds. So you can have a more diversified portfolio of how you think about your life and what you're doing with it.
Well, especially with podcasting, because there's I've seen a lot of similarities in the podcasting world, and funny enough, with the bariatric world, you've got the people that are like, yeah, podcasting's awesome, and then you've got the really cynical people who are like, fucking everybody has a podcast now, it's worth nothing. But no, that's not true, because there are some people that are listening to this podcast right now with you and I, and this is their very first podcast they'll ever hear. They just literally picked up one, let's figure out what a podcast is. Press play, and that's how I discovered it. I just kind of stumbled into it. I was like, oh, Kevin Smith has a podcast. Let's see what he has to say. I don't know what a podcast is, but let's listen to it.
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Yeah, and, the other day I was talking to somebody and they're like, oh, yeah, I really like true crime. I was like, look, there are a million podcasts for true crime. I was like, if you can find one or two that you'll like, there's a million different styles within that. And I tell people, no matter what you like, you can find a podcast about it.
And that's sort of the cost and benefit too, coming out of 2020, is that there is free learning everywhere.
Yes.
If you have a phone or a computer or access to the internet in some way, shape, or form, you can turn it on and you can access some form of knowledge, which it gets to be a curse because it's information overload. There's so many resources.
And you don't have the filter to stop the bad information versus the good information. There's still people that regurgitate that whole, we only use 10% of our brain thing, even though that was wholly disproven years ago. But there's still people that spit that that quote unquote fact out, and you can find it online. You can find that fact online that.
Well, and it's decision fatigue, right? I think that's what happens again to kids these days, is that there's so much information. In our generation, we were the last generation to sort of come up and have different paths that you could take. Right. And when you have less choice, it's almost easier because it's sort of like the tunnel vision you were talking about earlier, when you're I have a goal and I'm super focused on this goal. I'm going to make music, and school is something I do in the pastime. And when kids nowadays have access to all of this information and have no way to determine what's right or wrong, then that learned helplessness is going to come in even harder, because and that's why I say, I've talked to a lot of kids that I've worked with and things like that, where we talk about their existential dread.
Yeah.
Right. It's very existential. And that's a really young age to feel doom. Right.
Yes. Doom to me at that point. I was just like, oh no, I don't have Rice Krispie treats. At that age, that was doom to me.
I was like, oh, this boy doesn't like me. Or, I think that was I was boy crazy. So I think it was that, this boy doesn't like me and my world is over. And I actually heard somebody talk about that today, where you're a kid that goes through a breakup, right? Or that gets rejected by their crush is just as devastated as an adult that goes through a divorce, even though the ramifications aren't the same.
Yeah, no, because it means more to you at that time when
Yeah.
it has no other ramification but emotional.
Yep. The devastation is equal. It's just you lose a house over
You
it.
don't lose a house. Yeah, exactly. You don't have to split a kid in two and like,
Right.
have them spend time at different people. No, you don't have all that. But I mean, when you're 12 and you're going through your first like quote unquote relationship, that's all you've known. That
Yep,
one
it's
relationship.
devastating.
And then when you see him or her kissing random stranger A in school, that's the end of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And you that's really again where you build up the tolerance for distress and rejection and
Yep.
shame and guilt and
Yes.
all the things when you're a kid where you're just awkwardly stumbling through life.
I'm terrible with math, but I learned a lot about statistics by asking out a bunch of different people. And like, you're like, all right, 2/10 out of everybody, that's 20%, says yes. So like,
Now I know math.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I get it now. Like, but there was something you said about the indecision just by sheer overwhelming choice. That happens. And though people might not think it's ever happened to them, go to Netflix, find something.
Choose.
Just choose anything. I guarantee you it's going to take you 15 minutes to find something unless you're already in the middle of a show that you like. It's going to take you forever. But now you have the choice of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. It's just, the choice is just thrown at you.
Well, that's one thing I would say to parents too, is that like, if you think about how people have treated each other this year, like you think kids get bullied, like adults get bullied this year just as much as kids do. If you ever want to know what it's like to be a kid that's bullied, like you've probably been bullied by somebody pushing a political agenda on social media this year at some point.
Yes.
Right. By a meme. You've probably been bullied by a meme. At some point this year.
That's where that thing comes from, where people see a meme and like, I feel attacked because
personally attacked.
Yeah, I feel personally attacked by this meme because I mean, look, that's all people have time to do now. They have time to just create things that antagonize and poke and prod and even if somebody's not very creative, you make 100, one of them's bound to annoy somebody.
Yeah, because of our difference of opinions, and it's like you're and there's not enough time in the world to learn everything there is to know. And if you're have any ounce of intelligence, you'll know that the more you learn, the more you know how much you actually don't know. And that's been a big thing this year where it's like, well, you can't say this because of blah, 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 and this fact and this opinion and this, and it's like, you can't refute every single sentence. Like, I can't even tell you how many people try to like engage me in these like long form debates on Facebook about like these very complex issues. And I'm like, I don't have time to sit here and write you a 12-page essay on Facebook because you think that, blue is a dumb color. Like I can't,
and realistically speaking, they're not going to read it anyway. They're going to see the long response and they're going to be like, fuck you. Like they're
going to pick the one thing out of your comment that that makes them feel uncomfortable and attack you for it.
Yes. The last show I brought up the fat acceptance group. And like, I did that while basically holding an umbrella in front of my face and just waiting for the shit to hit the fan. Like, and I'm just like, here we go. Like, and
lots
luckily,
of people aren't gonna like this.
Yeah. And luckily my listener base isn't that big to where it's got to one of them to where I just haven't had just a flood of hatred come my way. So I'm happy about that. But like you said, in order to think, you have to face willing being offensive.
And you have to have like the humility to feel like you don't know, right? Like to.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a dummy. I'm a chimp with a driver's license still. Like, like I'm fully very aware about the limitations of my intellect, which is very limited in some respects. But I tend to turn, like, if I need a question answered about this profession, I'm going to go to that person.
Mm-hmm.
I could have sat here.
You wouldn't be able to have you wouldn't be able to have a podcast if you weren't, if you couldn't have an open conversation, because that's what it's about.
Exactly. And, if I tried to do this by myself, have this conversation, I would sound like a lunatic. I'd be like, yeah, just take your kid out and, just go hang out with people. Like I would have just made stuff up and probably got somebody hurt because I'm not knowledgeable in certain areas like this.
I did that recently. I did a video episode of my podcast and I only released it to a few people, a few like my bigger fans, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And I was just I get on these rants sometimes where I get really motivated by something that I hear. And when I heard The Social Dilemma and I watched that, I was like, I didn't know that people didn't know that this
That
was going
baffled me
on.
too. That baffled me too because so the reason that Facebook got big is because they poached this female programmer from Google. And her whole job was to get into everybody's cookies, just like you always click OK, you can take my cookies. And then they make targeted advertisement on the side of Facebook where, you know, if I have my phone in my hand and I start talking about bagels, 100%, now that I just said that, I'm going to get bagel advertisements later.
Yep.
And I guess because it was so blatant that people didn't see it. Have you ever seen the video? This video is very popular in the law enforcement, but I'm assuming just because of how it's framed, it would be popular in a psychological, the psychological world. It's two teams, one wearing white shirts, one wearing black shirts, playing basketball, and you're watching them.
The gorilla,
and the gorilla just walks right through the middle of the screen, and nobody ever sees the gorilla.
Yep,
like that's what it is. There's literally a guy in a gorilla suit walking through frame. Yeah. How do you not see that? And I think that's a lot of what's going on right now.
Yes. And that's a great example. And it's funny to me because we know so much about psychology. Like major psychologists and researchers are employed by other like leaders and things like that will say like this, you know, of Google or Facebook or whatever, that will say, you know, yes, if you want more engagement, if you want people to spend more time on the page, because the longer you're on a page, the more they profit. Yeah. So you're, like they said, like you're what they say in the Social Dilemma, you're the product.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're the one being sold, and people's minds were like blown by that. And I'm like, no, we've known the psychological data for years and years and years and years and years. And it's always worked because humans are the way we are.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, like I said, if I talk about, you know, I want knives, I'm starting to look for knives for cooking, you know, for the next month, that's all I'm going to get in terms of my, like, you go to Amazon, you know, they're competitors, but Facebook sells your data to Amazon and all that. It's the one thing that we truly have, but we can't sell, but somebody else can sell it.
Yeah. You got to kind of connect the dots. And I think the reason why people don't take on these things, right? It's kind of like conspiracy theories, right? Like people can't absorb this information sometimes because they think that it's so far fetched. You know, they think it's like, oh, like nobody would ever do that, or nobody's that evil, or it's not that easy to manipulate, or whatever. You know, they minimize whatever is going on because they believe it's not possible.
Well, I mean, like the book 1984, prime example. Like when that came out, people were like, oh man, that's a crazy future. Thank God we're never going to live that. Cut to 2020.
Yeah.
You know, and essentially not everything, but almost everything in that book has happened, is happening. And again, I think that's another issue psychologically. Like,
yeah, well, it's really based in evolution. It's evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just how we've evolved to think over time. And I think there was like some communist quote or something that was about like, I'm not going to feed this to you in a tidal wave. I'm going to give it to you in small spoonfuls until all of a sudden you're dying of a poison that you didn't know you were taking.
What's the old explanation or expression? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You know, You're not going to come at people with this massive thing. No. We're going to slip a little. That's why spies work. There's this little person that just goes in, causes a little problem, walk out, and then before you know it, you've got a bigger issue on your hand than you ever knew.
Yeah, I read way more books on dark psychology than I do about parenting. So
okay,
sorry, parents that are listening.
No. I like this is actually something that really interests me. Like, look, as much as I'm doing this for everybody else, I want to talk to somebody. You know what I mean? Like, I've been looking for good books on dark psychology, but I think whoever does the covers for most of those books want to make the most fantastical looking shit on the cover. And I tend not to trust that. I'm just like, oh, you're just a dude trying to sell a book with no good information.
You're trying real hard not to fall for the marketing.
Yeah. Like at that point, I'm trying to wrap my like tripping myself out at that point. I'm just like, all right, that book looks like it's full of shit, but it's probably not, but is it, you know? And I that's the stuff I love, like the persuasion, the NLP, all that stuff. Like, And it's not even a control thing. I just want to be able to recognize
and understand it.
Yeah, and when somebody's trying to do it to me,
Right.
I want to
Right.
be able to go, no. I know that trick that you're doing.
I'm trained in hypnosis, and when I tell people that, they're like, "Are you doing it right now?" And I'm like, "No, I'm
No,
not going to do
no.
it without you." Or that's I mean, that's the classic. It's like psychiatrist, psychologist. Are you reading my mind? I'm like, if I could read your mind, I'd be rich.
Yeah,
So
I'd be really rich. You'd walk in and and you could be like, you hate your dad, blah, blah, blah. This didn't
yeah,
happen, that happened. We'll figure out how to fix this. Don't worry. And they'd be, oh, wow, here's $200,000 for the next year.
I just resign myself to saying yes now. When people ask me that, they're like, "Are you reading my mind?" I'm like, "Yes."
Would you believe me if no matter what answer I give you, are you going to believe me? And then when they just give you the face and just be like, exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, as psychologists, I read everything. I take in all the cues. I take in the body language, the eye contact, the tone of voice, the volume of your voice, the what you wear, how you hold your body, how you move,
Yeah, are you
gestures, things like
shifting in
that.
your seat while you're talking to me? Like, are you making stern eye contact? Are you avoiding eye contact? Those are
Right.
all
And
big
when you
cues.
talk to so many different people, so many different types of people over time, those patterns really get to emerge. And that's how we wind up with things like diagnoses and the DSM and things like that. Like, so many things were born from the field of psychology that we don't even realize were created in the field of psychology. And I hold the field of psychology responsible for a lot of bullshit that goes on that people don't realize came from this field.
So now that you say that, there's an old question I had that pops in my head that I've heard both yes and no's on. Um, the technical term of, I don't know if it's more the term psychopath or psychopathy. Like, that's not a real DSM term. Am I correct with that? Like,
It used to be.
it used to be, and they removed it.
Yeah, it used to be that sort of evolved into something else. The thing about psychologists is that all of us want to be the one to like have the major breakthrough.
Yeah.
So we just take all the shit we already know and like relabel it and repackage it and reorganize it and present it to you in a different way. And then you think something new and different and we're like, oh, look, it's a new thing. And it's really not. Like, positive psychology was a huge problem, right? Like, positive psychology is great, but it's brought us into this place where we don't have a lot of distress tolerance because now we somehow believe that we're supposed to be happy all the time. And that's why people get so bitter about like positive affirmations, which generally don't work all that well, because if you don't believe the affirmation, then it's just going to feel like a incongruence internally all the time.
And to do the positive affirmation, you have to have some substance behind it, which essentially you're doing the work anyway.
Yeah.
So like you said, the easy answer is usually the answer, but it's hard to get to that easy answer. You got to do a lot of work.
Nobody ever wants it. Nobody ever wants the easy answer ever.
Everybody wants to hear that, take this pill, you won't be sad anymore. No, you won't be sad. You're not going to feel anything. You're going to be numb. And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because I feel that you have to actually feel the emotion to be able to process it correctly. Otherwise, you don't make the connection. It's like, when you're a kid, I've known people that are colorblind, and everybody always says these things to them, like, "Oh, did you just learn that was green, but it's actually orange? Did your parents teach you wrong?" Like, it's the same thing. You're not making the neural connections to your emotions, and I think that's what leads people to bad places, because when they get off medicated, they don't know how to process everything coming in.
Well, when you think about like being a kid too, and like how like wildly outrageous like every feeling is, and it's like these huge feelings over these small things, and it's just so unregulated and stuff. Like, whatever you're told growing up will really dictate your relationship to that experience. So a feeling is really just information, right? It's a sensation. That's why people say like pain in the neck or pain in the back, or when you go breathless if you have a panic attack or things like that, right? Your body's physiologically responding to something. It could be a thought or how your mind is processing data.
Yeah.
So we have now brought ourselves into this place where we think we're supposed to feel a certain way, and we have all these expectations we put expectations on feelings, or put expectations on ourselves that are completely unrealistic and unnecessary. And now all of a sudden we're wildly emotionally dysregulated because we're having a panic attack because we can't stop the feeling that we never needed to stop in the first place. And if we just made the meaning that it was information,
I mean, it's literally
run our life.
making a mountain out of a molehill. You know, it's like taking a step literally from your front door to the sidewalk, but in your brain, it's like you're jumping out of an airplane. Like
Yeah,
you're
you're like
making this.
scaling the Grand Canyon.
Yes, exactly. And I think a lot of people do that. And again, it's easy to do right now. I can see how it's easy to spiral.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because everything's compounded.
Yeah.
Everything feels 10 times worse because it's also a global pandemic. And that's, again, why words are so important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're in a pandemic. Like, what the fuck does that mean? You know,
That
like,
means the virus has gone to another country. That's essentially what that means. Like now it's global. It's not just contained to this one area. Whereas people think like pandemic, it's the plague, it's coming to kill you, you know? And I just like one of the things I was saying earlier was now all these parents and all these kids are spending all this time together for, you know, let's say you've been off the whole time. You've been at home for 9 months, 10 months. And I think people are getting a bad feeling basically saying, oh, I don't know if I like my kid. Like I love him, right? But I don't know if I'm liking him right now.
Right.
And I think people have this guilt about that, but that's perfectly normal because people, you know, your kid is just a person and you love him and you would die for that kid. But, you know, be stuck in the house for any amount of time longer because kids and parents aren't supposed to be together that much.
Well, yeah, no. And kids always drive their parents crazy, namely because that your kid's usually, you know, half of you and half of somebody else.
Yes.
So if you're, you know, if you have your biological kid in front of you, it's probably even harder because their dysregulation is really amplifying the things that you struggle with personally.
Yeah.
So now you're frustrated about the things that frustrate you about yourself, and then that's all being triggered. So,
it's a brutal cycle at that point. It's a very brutal cycle.
I think taking it sometimes too with like just a little bit of grace and humility and like, and not humility, but humor, right? Like really learn to laugh. We talk about that a lot on my podcast. Actually, we talk a lot about laughing and like the importance of laughing and like what you were saying, right? Like, not being offended by something that is offensive, right? Because if those things come up and your kid's showing you a side of yourself that you don't like, right? Being able to laugh at that is really important instead of beating yourself up or worrying or trying to control it or anything like that. It's sort of just being in reflection with the experience rather than having to manipulate the experience.
Now, one of the things you said was when right after the pandemic started and the lockdown started and everything, is that right when you started the podcast?
We started in July, I think.
Oh, wow.
June or July.
And just to throw it out there, it's called the Psychologym, right?
Psychologym. Yep. Yes. The Psychologym Podcast. Yep.
GYM, by the way, everybody. And
dumb name in retrospect.
I think that's perfect. Especially right now. I think it's perfect. You're working out your mind.
I'm obsessed with the word, but people are like, what?
You could put it on a t-shirt. It would be so amazing.
I was not using my neuro-linguistic programming skills when I came up with that
one. But I think it's genius. You know, it's a place to work out your mind. And I think that a lot of people actually need to get into a quote unquote psychologym. You know, they need to work out their mind. They need to, you know, you have to embrace the things that your deficiencies as well as your proficiencies. I've always said that to people. You know, I have people in my DMs, whether it be on Twitter, on Instagram, you know, they come to me, especially since this podcast is launched, like telling me everything, you know, absolutely horrible things. And I always try to encourage them. I was just like, you know, I feel special that you told me this, but I feel that you need to work through this and confront it, essentially. Not the person, but the problem. And I don't think that's bad advice, so to speak. Anybody that's in my circle, I always I'm just like, hey man, come over, you know, let's work out. We can, you know, just work through some stuff, you know, because I tell people that physically when I work out, it does work through anything in my head. I don't know why that connection is there. I don't know what that is, but that is a real thing. Am I right?
Oh yeah. Well, there's a lot of connections there. I mean, 85%. I always get this stat wrong, but it's like 85% of your serotonin and your neurotransmitters are created in your gut.
Wow,
And
that I didn't know at
yeah,
all.
so your intestinal tract is made of the same thing that your brain is because it's developed at the same time in the womb. So a lot of our anxiety and depression and stuff can be resolved with physical fitness and nutrition, but people don't want to hear that because it's not easy to do.
No, it's definitely not. It's
And that's another problem when we talk about like evolution of like kids and what they're growing up with, is that all the GMOs and the processed food and all the things that we're putting in our body is deteriorating our intestinal tract and our intestinal lining. And you're going to see increases in autoimmune disease and thyroid disorders and things like that, because everything in your body is connected, and we highly underestimate the importance of those connections. So when you're building muscle, even when you're bodybuilding or training and building muscle, like that strengthens your bones.
yeah,
And I think people don't know that, like just things like that, where our bodies were designed to move. There's a cool book called The Joy of Movement by Kelly McGonigal. She's one of my favorite researchers. She was a stress researcher for a really long time, and she was telling people over and over and over again about how bad stress is for you,
yeah,
not fully understanding how stress reacts in your body. And when she found out the actual research behind that with, time and technology and research, she realized that stress is actually a good thing for us to a
absolutely.
degree. And it's our belief about stress that's the problem. So if we believe that stress is bad, like then you see heart conditions, because that's when you see like your blood pressure go up because your vessels will constrict.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's how connected our mind and our body and our experiences are to our overall well-being. They're not separate. They never have been, and they never will be. So really understanding that what you fuel your body with, the thoughts that you have also is like fuel for your brain. If you have something like 30,000 thoughts, some crazy number a day of thoughts, and we're not conscious of all of them because we live in our own heads and we're always going to be in our own heads.
Yeah,
But if you really start paying attention to the types of thoughts that you're having, then you can really start shifting what you're focusing on, what you're attending to, right? Which is why, again, neurolinguistic programming and stuff, the messages that you absorb from the environment are so important, because they're really impacting not only your brain, but your nervous system. And your nervous system is going to affect your hormone balance, your ability to digest food, your ability to absorb nutrients, things like that.
and that's funny. That actually reminds me of a line from, I think it was Pirates of the Caribbean, where Johnny Depp says, "It's not the problem that's the problem. It's your problem with the problem that's the problem."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially exactly what that was. I mean, it's not that, I mean, everybody has a problem, whether it be physical, mental. It's you having an issue that you're having an issue.
Yeah.
That plays hell with you,
Yep.
And I think that'll become more pronounced in the generations that are kids now, because they don't know how to deal with their issues.
Right. And the things that they're going to observe as problems are going to be surmountable things that they feel are insurmountable.
Yeah, well, and I think, that it sounds really bad, but I think that's for the future of your business is going to be huge, because these kids have basically been put on a prescription of screen time and a prescription of, movies and TVs, which again, I don't think, and it's just a personal opinion, that those things alter a person if you're just watching them, but if you live in them and look at Fortnite. Fortnite is a perfect example. The colors, the everything. It's not overtly violent. It's passively violent, really.
Yeah, because you don't understand consequence and ramification. So if you push somebody in Fortnite and you push somebody in real life,
Two different reactions you're going to get.
Right.
I've seen people, even when I've done other podcasts where they bring me on as a non-cop but knows a lot of cop shit. And they all say, well, why didn't he just grab this person's gun? And it's just like, that's not real. That's not the real world. You don't try to grab the thing that's ninja, going to shoot you.
Right.
This isn't, we're not Jet Li. Like, we're not, that's not how this world works.
I find that people don't understand things unless they go through it themselves. And even then, it's their own experience. So they still can't fully relate. We can relate to things to a degree, but I think that we overestimate our ability to really understand what it would be like to be in any given situation.
Because I think your brain makes it less severe than it is. You know,
Yeah.
like for example, people say all the time, you know, oh, every time a cop walks up to a car, oh, why is he so scared? It's like because, you know, on the news the other day, he heard that a guy in Las Vegas walked up to a car to give a ticket, and he got his head blown off. You know,
Yeah, that's what was killing me about watching all the civil unrest this year. I was just watching everybody cause one another trauma. Like I was just watching all of that unfold, going, "Wow, you guys are causing each other so much trauma."
And in an area like Portland, for example, where before this year it seemed like a really tight community,
Right.
and now the whole community has distrust for each other.
Yeah.
You know,
Somebody said the other day, what's easier to control or what's easier to fight, a whole country or a half a country?
I
I
mean, the Civil War is proof of that.
Right.
You know, I tell people as much as things change in the world of psychology, a lot of them go back to fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
You know,
Really.
they look back on guys like Jung and Young and stuff like that, and it's these foundations that set the whole thing up for everybody else. Like you said, everybody's going to go back to the foundation and try to rename it and take credit for it. But no, it's been around since 1823 or, you know.
Well, I mean, it goes back to like Aristotle and Socrates and the original philosophers that were all sitting around. Once they had the time to sit around is what happened, right? They had like baths and communities where they could sit and converse. Like now we have bars. And that's what they had. So they would sit around and question the existence of life and try to, even then they try to differentiate the difference between grief and depression, which we still to this day try to do, you know, which is kind of a weird concept now, because if you look at the DSM, which is our diagnostic and statistical manual, which is where all diagnoses come from, they still are trying to differentiate between like grief and depression. And they do that with time. Like, oh, like, well, if you're grieving more than this amount of time, then you might be depressed. And it's like, well, who are you to say what my grief is supposed to look like? If you lose your husband, it's going to look way different than if you lose,
your
somebody's
great grandfather that you barely talk to ever.
Yeah. Like your great uncle Joe, who you've never seen. Yeah. So it's like, we try to put, psychology tries to put people in these socially acceptable boxes a lot of times. And that kind of frustrates me, because even like it happens with addiction too, or like even with the police, right? All police are this way, or all black people are this way.
You can't generalize like that.
Yeah, you can't overgeneralize, and that's such a huge problem, because we try to create these. That's what I see a lot of online now, is these
creating an enemy
rules. They're rules.
Yeah, it's creating an enemy, and then what you always wind up seeing is that the people who create this massive set of rules for enemies wind up coming all the way back around and then attacking themselves, and they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
The same people that were like, yes, we agree on these rules. Perfect. Awesome. Now let's go forward that. And all of a sudden they're like, wait, why am I getting kicked?
Right.
You know,
right. You're kicking yourself in your own ass. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's an important part that people need to kind of just understand that you are perfectly allowed to feel what you're feeling, but you should also take the time to deal with it.
Well, to know that your reaction to that particular stimuli that caused that feeling is yours and nobody else's.
Yes.
And to know that feelings and behaviors are two completely different things.
Yes.
A feeling won't kill you, a behavior will.
Absolutely. That is a very, very well put phrase, and I think a lot of people don't put that together.
We've conflated the two, kind of like we've conflated confidence and narcissism. Like nobody's allowed to be confident anymore. If you show any kind of confidence, you're a narcissist, and that's just not true.
No, absolutely not. I'm genuinely surprised that in the past year, because as I've gotten healthier, my confidence has gone up. Nobody's been trying to label being narcissistic. I was like, no, I know my worth now.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between knowing your worth and just kind of existing. you know?
Well, there's something to be said about walking away from things that are draining your energy, like parents too, especially, right? Like you have so much on your plate right now, trying to deal with what you're dealing with, whatever that looks like from whatever circumstance you're coming from.
Yeah.
And if you're also trying to juggle everybody else's feelings and everybody else's health and everybody else's, you know, neuroticism, like you're going to drain your own energy. And that's why they say put the oxygen mask on first, because you can't take care of anything unless you're taking care of yourself. And sometimes the way that we take care of ourselves is to walk away from the things that are trying to keep us back and trying to hold us down. And a lot of people look at that as being cold or narcissistic or
Or
like
indifferent.
don't care.
Yeah. And that's wholly not true. I care about everybody in my life. I care about a tremendous amount. But right now, I'm trying to put my own mask on.
Right. Right. And the stronger you are, the more oxygen you get in your own lungs, the better. It's just, you can love somebody from a distance too. You know what I mean? Like you can really
Absolutely.
care about somebody and not have to show up in their life every day, or be able to set a boundary for yourself where you're like, I need to set this boundary so that I can take care of myself, because not setting it, having an enmesh boundary or having boundaries that are way too strict will either separate you from the connection that you need, or they'll overwhelm you with connection that you don't need.
There's something I was actually just thought about as you were saying that. People that this is essentially hell for people that live with people that are codependent.
Right.
This whole thing, like, I think this is going to bring a lot of people's codependency issues out big time, because especially when this all ends, now you've had this constant validation for a year or a year and a half, however long this takes, and now you're not going to have it anymore. How do these people work on moving past that? Because this is unprecedented.
Great point. That's a really good point. I kind of felt like codependency was sort of like a dying word in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, it's been
but
brought back.
Yeah, right. This is going to like cause the resurgence. Well, I mean, it's usually linked to addiction too. So, I mean, with the addiction, it's going to be the same. But codependency is really this idea that I have to feel the same way you do, or your mood creates my mood, right?
Yeah.
Like at its most baseline, basic level, and you have to unhook the idea of like, I'm somebody being responsible for your feelings.
Yeah.
Right. Or the idea that like, if you're not okay, I have to not be okay as well in order to show that I care for you. Like I put something up on my Instagram the other day about how like stressing out doesn't equal caring.
Yeah. No, it
Right.
doesn't.
Like freaking out doesn't mean you care more.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
I could look totally cool, calm, and collected and still care. I don't have to have a scream in the streets in order to demonstrate, that
That you're
I see your
virtuous.
suffering. Right. Right.
I mean, as Bill Burr has said before, losing your shit is sometimes part of the process.
Yeah.
You can't expect people to be in the situation we're in and be perfectly calm, perfectly collected at all time. It's okay to lose your shit every now and then, just like you lose your shit while you're building an IKEA desk. Like what, like who's going to expect you to keep it together this long through all this? Like, and I think people need to know that it's okay to know that it's okay to feel this way in terms of like overwhelmed, a little overwhelmed. You don't know the right answer. Let's be honest. Nobody knows the right answer right now.
Right. And that's where you remind yourself, right? You remind yourself, oh yeah, like somebody today was like, I was talking to a friend and she was beating herself up about finances. And I was like, we're in a pandemic. Like you paid your property taxes. You're good.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do.
You're not being kicked out. You're all good.
Right. You have roofs over your head. You have food. We have toilet paper. Everybody's fine. Like just sort of that's what taking inventory is about too. And coming back to what do I need? Right. What do you need versus what do you want?
Yeah.
And really focusing on like, yeah, like you're totally allowed to freak out, and you're allowed to let somebody freak out, right? If everybody, like I said, everybody's going through something different. Like if somebody's grieving a loss, if somebody's angry, if somebody's dealing with addiction, like you're allowed to let them freak out. However, if you're not actively processing your own feelings and emotions, right, it'll be a lot easier for you if you're practicing stress management tools, if you're trying to make meaning, if you're trying to reconceptualize or reframe or reprocess what you're going through. that's going to make it easier for you. It's the same idea as working out and working that muscle so your muscles don't atrophy.
That goes along with me saying to people that they kind of just need to find their why in all of this. They need to find why they're doing this. Why am I out here working out? Well, it's to better myself. Why am I trying to better myself? So I can get a better job, or I can get a better this or that, or I just want to be around for my kids longer, or things like that. I think that giving yourself a purpose in philosophy gives you a purpose in general, like in life.
Yeah, I always say like find the why behind the why too.
Yes.
Right? Actually, David Goggins put something up the other day that was
I reposted it. It said, start the question with why.
Don't. Well, he said something like forget why.
Yeah,
like,
well, he said forget why. He said start with why, which is what made me reframe it, which was, why am I doing this? I'm doing this for X, Y, and Z. Okay, awesome.
And my doctor would say like, and this is where the psychologist wanted to be like, no, I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to do it different. Like my doctor would say, what's the why behind your why? Right. So if you learn to manage your emotions, what's that going to allow you to do?
Yeah.
Right. So like, if I want to get in shape, like, all right, well, I want to, my why for working out is I want to lose 10 pounds. All right. Well, what would losing 10 pounds allow you to do? Right. As like one of the most basic examples.
Yeah.
Right. More clear cut examples. And that's why you would work with a therapist, right? Because being able to talk those things out and really nailing down and peeling back those different layers of what makes you work in particular is really helpful, because then you'll have that self-awareness and self-understanding. I always say I take my clients from self-awareness to self-compassion to self-understanding to self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And we sort of move through that process, because you have to develop the awareness first, right? Like, what am I thinking? How am I behaving? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Mm-hmm. And then you have to have the compassion, like, okay, well, I'm feeling the way I'm feeling because this is happening. And I respond this way because it's connected to these experiences that I've had in my past that are specific to me, which is why, Susie over there isn't responding the same way that I am to the same stimuli. And then you move, and so on and so on.
That's important. I think a lot of people, everybody always says nature versus nurture when it's clearly both.
It's both, yeah.
Like you can be born with like a cap on your emotions, and you look at somebody like a sociopath, like who's just flat, like unmedicated, flat, like that's just who they are. They don't feel one way or the other. That's being born that way.
A lot of sociopaths, actually, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Because aren't they good at mimicking the world around them's emotions? They're like, all right, they're almost computer-like. They're like, I'm supposed to be upset here, so cue the upset.
Yep, and it doesn't mean that they don't feel emotions. They do feel emotions. They just don't connect to others emotionally.
Yes.
So and that's because of their brain structure.
Yeah, but then there's people that almost gain like a acquired version of that, which is you've had a lot of things in your life, so you've had to just shut your emotions down. You've had to grow almost apathetic, not sympathetic with the world around you, and that's a nurtured, sociopathy almost.
Yep. Yeah, it's you're disconnected. You're disconnecting from the world around you.
Yeah, and hopefully, again, after all this is over, I'm just hoping that enough people will have taken a step back from themselves, their problem, and had time to work it out. Like I think there's got to be a breaking point where people are like, okay, this isn't going away, so might as well start working on myself.
Right, exactly. You have to do something with it. You can't just wait for it to pass.
Yeah, no, not at all. Honestly, I did want to say thank you so very much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I love this.
Yeah, you're always welcome on, no matter what happens on the show. Please plug away, like anything, the podcast, your socials, whatever. I want you to be able to do it.
Yes. So at the Psychologym Podcast, psychology with an M at the end, on Instagram at the Psychologym Podcast. You can write in on email, the Psychologym Podcast at gmail.com. We have a Facebook page. I have a Twitter page. I don't know how to tweet, so but feel free. Give us a like. We're on 6 different platforms. Like, share, follow, discuss. If you hate us, tell us that too. We want to know. The best gift we could possibly receive is your personal growth, and through hearing about your personal growth, we really grow, and that's really the purpose of what we do. So yeah, please connect and tune in and let us know what you think. And
that is really, really awesome. Honestly, it is. Again, thank you times a million. You guys can get at me at Brock with the Strong Name on Instagram, at the Broadcast on all socials, and of course this podcast anywhere. So anyways, I will talk to you guys a little later. See ya.